on discrimination on the basis of sex, and that will include discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. This means that it is the formal position of the Department of Health and Human Services that everyone, including transgender individuals, should be able to access health care free from discrimination or interference, period. This interpretation will guide our department in processing complaints and conducting investigations. The steps we're taking at HHS to prevent discrimination against LGBTQ+ Americans in healthcare settings is just one part of President Biden's executive order on preventing and combating discrimination on the basis of gender identity or sexual orientation. As a pediatrician and adolescent medicine specialist, I also know the importance of gender-affirming medical care for transgender people who need it. Gender-affirming care is both medically necessary and actually life-saving, especially for transgender youth. Every American deserves the opportunity to reach their full potential and access safe and respectful health care. Unfortunately, some have sought to prevent transgender youth from accessing the health care that they need. This is politics, and politics has no place in our health care system. And actually, this defies the standards of care. Above all, we need to support trans youth and their families and parents to help them achieve the good health and quality care that they deserve. The future for our community is brighter, but we have not made progress unless we have made progress for all. Together, we must strongly advocate for the most underserved and marginalized in our community, including our trans youth, and trans women of color who are at risk not only of harassment or discrimination, but actually of violence and murder. Now, I am a positive and optimistic person, and I'd like to leave you with a message of hope. There is a place for you in America. Thank you.
In his first week in office, President Biden affirmed that every qualified American should be able to serve our nation in uniform. He rescinded the discriminatory ban on transgender service members, ensuring that openly trans service members can proudly serve in the United States military. Transgender service members, like Lieutenant Colonel Bree Fram, make our country stronger and more secure. Let's hear her story.
I'm Lieutenant Colonel Bree Fram, an astronautical engineer in the U.S. Air Force, soon to transfer to the Space Force. And I'm transgender. In March 2019, while serving in a command position, I looked into my hotel room's bathroom mirror as I pulled on a men's sport coat and something cemented. This wasn't me. Facing a soon-to-be implemented ban on transgender military service, it was the final realization that if I didn't take action right then to live authentically, I would be deliberately stunting my growth as a leader and as a person. My journey as a transgender service member, though challenging, has been an intense and rewarding path of personal and professional development. Despite the discriminatory policy then in place, I've enjoyed incredible support from my leaders and from those I've had the honor and privilege to lead throughout my transition. Yet as one of approximately 1,600 transgender service members who served openly at the time, I was a member of an endangered species, officially labeled a burden and a disruption to the military, despite all evidence to the contrary, until policy changed again this year. Now, thanks to the action of President Biden during his first week in office to restore open service, we will not be the last transgender people to wear the uniforms of this nation. Serving openly allowed me to flourish as my authentic self. My authenticity opened new pathways of communication and connection. I was a better commander because of it. Removing real or perceived barriers to authenticity that force people to hide who they are is a gift to individuals and organizations. With those burdens removed, people who previously dedicated their mental energy to protecting their identity can now dedicate themselves fully to the mission. For the military, service members could have been good or even great at what they did, but they weren't reaching their full potential. With our biggest advantage in conflict being our people, we need everyone at their best. Reopening military service to transgender individuals is a gift to our nation. Every time the military has integrated minority groups, from African Americans to women to lesbians, gays, and bisexuals, we have emerged stronger because of it. They have all served with honor and distinction. It's the same with transgender service members. The United States military is going to fight and win in the future based on brain power. And if some of those brains just happen to be in transgender bodies capable of meeting all physical standards, they could be our future heroes. A society that doesn't tap into the potential of all its members naturally self-limits what it can do. But the United States dreams big and can't afford to miss out on the talents of anyone willing to dedicate their lives to those dreams. As someone who has sworn to support and defend the Constitution that underpins those big dreams, I'm thrilled that I and other trans service members will have the opportunity to help make those dreams a reality for our fellow Americans.
One of the best parts of being a kid is playing sports on your school team or with friends. But in some states around the country, state legislatures have tried to ban transgender kids from participating in school sports activities. These bans are wrong. Transgender kids belong on the field just like everybody else. I'm excited to introduce a trailblazing athlete, Chris Moser, the first openly transgender athlete to represent our country on Team USA, to share more about why inclusion in sports matters for all kids.
Hello, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Chris Moser. My pronouns are he and him, and I'm a Team USA athlete. In 2016, I became the first transgender man to represent the United States in men's international competition. And in 2020 was the first trans man to participate in the men's Olympic trials event. I'm also the founder of transathlete.com, the go-to resource for information about policies and best practices for the inclusion of trans and non-binary athletes in sport. This year, we've seen the worst attacks on the transgender community, with 150 pieces of anti-transgender legislation introduced by state lawmakers across the country. Half of those bills, 75 bills, targeted transgender youth in sport. This year alone, over 30 states attempted to pass legislation that would ban transgender youth, younger versions of me, from playing sports with their friends. And in 8 states this year, bans on trans youth were enacted, making 9 states in our country that now have laws that would ban trans youth from playing on teams that align with their identity. So often in these conversations, the voices of the youth who are most impacted are missing. So I'm thrilled to be joined here today by Sarah Rose Huckman and Libby Gonzalez. First, could each of you introduce yourselves? Sarah, let's start with you.
Hi, I'm Sarah Rose Huckman. I'm 20 years old. Background of sports, I think I did 4 sports back in high school, track, cross country, running, cross country skiing, and alpine skiing. I love doing sports just because it makes me who I am today, and it keeps me upbeat and positive. And I am currently a part of Changing the Game, a documentary centered on transgender athletes. It's out on Hulu.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sarah Rose. And Libby, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Libby Gonzalez. I live in Texas and I'm 11 years old and I use she, her pronouns.
Excellent.
I really love swimming. I feel like I get to be myself when I'm swimming. And I really also enjoy martial arts, basketball, and yoga. And I would really like to try tennis.
Great, thank you so much. Libby, let's start with you. You have been an advocate for trans rights since you were 7 years old. Why has playing sports been so important for you?
Actually, I've been advocating for my community since I was 6 years old. And I think that it's very important to let kids like me to play sports because it helps us stay healthy, and we get to make new friends, and I get to play with my friends that I have, and it's really fun.
Yeah, we know there are so many benefits to playing sports as a kid. Thank you for sharing that with us. Sarah Rose, you mentioned the documentary at the start. You were just featured in the incredible documentary, Changing the Game. Why did you decide to participate in the film, and what do you hope that people are taking away from it?
Yeah, thank you. I really decided to partake in changing the game right when I realized that this was something that needed to be put out into the world. We need more trans representation in sports, and we need more trans representation in general. And I really hope one big takeaway I really hope is coming from this is that trans athletes and trans people are human beings, and we just want to be able to do the sports and the things that we love without the fear of being discriminated against or the fear of being attacked because we are different from the other people. I just hope that people realize that we are just trying to live our lives and do things that we love.
I love that. And the film does an incredible job of sharing that. So thank you for being a part of it. Let's do one more question for both of you. What advice would you give other trans kids who want to play sports but are facing hurdles? Sarah Rose, let's start with you on this one.
Of course. I would just say, keep being yourself, keep doing the things that you love. Remember, even if the times are hard in the moment, just know that you have people who love you and accept you all over the world. It may not be where you are right now, but you'll find your people, you'll find your family, your significant other. You'll find it. You'll find the joy in sports. You'll find the joy in family, and just know that you're amazing and you're validated wherever you go.
How about you, Libby?
I would say, don't let anyone change who you are. You have people that support you. We got your back, even in the darkest corner, I guess. And just never lose hope. You have a ton of people that support you and care about you.
Wise words. Thank you so much, both of you. My advice to trans kids, to every trans kid out there, I want you to know that you can be your authentic self and continue to play the sports that you love. You have so many people out here fighting for you, from your peers like Libby and Sarah Rose to professional athletes like myself, and we will never stop fighting for you. My personal mission since I came out, and my motto since I came out in 2010, is to be the person that I needed when I was younger, to be that role model that I wish that I had. And so it is so wonderful to be in the presence of new role models and advocates. Thank you so much, Libby and Sarah Rose, for joining me in this conversation today. It is so wonderful to spend time with you, and I cannot wait to see all of the incredible things that you both go on to do.
Hello, my name is Elliott Hinkle. I use they, them pronouns, and I grew up in Wyoming's foster care system, but I live in Portland, Oregon now. I'm a transmasculine, non-binary person who grew up in foster care and didn't feel I could come out as fully myself until I left foster care at the age of 19. When I turned 19, I moved away from Wyoming and went to school in Portland, Oregon, where I was able to be myself as first a lesbian and then a trans person. And the adults in my life are some of the people who were pivotal in making sure that I felt I could be me. I didn't think I could do that while I was in foster care, but the adults in my life really helped me get to a place where I could find that support. The adults that were kind of crazy about me and wanted to make sure that I was fully me and brought myself fully to the table. My hope is that for LGBTQ youth in foster care, that they can be in a place where they also have the support that they need, that they can have loving and affirming homes, because affirming LGBTQ youth is suicide prevention. And for myself, having grown up with mental health struggles and suicidal ideation from not having that, it's so important that young people today get that so they can fully be themselves, as we're in a generation right now where youth aren't necessarily worried about what people think about them. They want to be who they are. And I hope that that energy continues and that they get what they deserve, which is loving, supporting families, friends, and communities.
Transgender Americans have led the movement for LGBTQ+ equality for generations. Today, transgender Americans are also leading our nation as elected public servants. Representation matters, and the 4 trailblazing elected officials we're about to hear from are showing transgender youth across our country that the sky is the limit.
Hi everyone, my name is Danica Rome. I'm the Virginia State Delegate, grateful to represent the people of the 13th District of the Virginia House of Delegates, which includes the city of Manassas Park and the western Prince William County portions of Haymarket, Gainesville, and my lifelong home Manassas as the first out and seated transgender state legislator in American history. Today, I'm joined here with 3 other barrier-breaking trans women in public service. Each of us were the first to be elected to office that we now hold in our states. But as Vice President Kamala Harris says, we may have been the first, but we won't be the last. We are here today to talk about why it matters when trans women lead, the barriers we faced, and how we overcame them. First, I am grateful and honored to introduce my friend, Andrea Jenkins. Andrea, you and I were elected the same night, November 7th, 2017, and you had the distinction of becoming the first Black, openly trans woman elected to public office in the United States. Please tell us your story and why representation of Black trans women in politics matters. What does it mean for how you approach racial equity, gender equity, and LGBTQ rights?
Hey, good. Thank you, Danica. And it's just so great to be here with you and all of my other fellow colleagues that are serving our communities all around the country. My name is Andrea Jenkins, and I am Vice President of the Minneapolis City Council. I live and work in Minneapolis, and I represent the 8th Ward in Minneapolis, now infamous for being home to the murder of George Floyd. We in the 8th Ward are seeking justice for our community and our city, and so grateful that we have been able to push the narrative around public safety and policing in our communities that will hopefully lead to positive systemic change in the way we keep our communities safe. I decided to run for office in 2017 after realizing that cities will be the front line of change in our communities. And I wanted to be a part of that process. And so we put together an amazing campaign team, a very diverse campaign team that was led by a young woman of color and queer and trans identified people working on our campaign, building political power and community power. And so it has just been one wild ride, as you may imagine, here in Minneapolis, dealing with the impacts from the coronavirus, and then subsequently the racial reckoning that has been transforming our entire nation. This has been a challenging time for elected officials all throughout the country, and it has tested the mettle of all of us. And I am so glad to be on the team with all of you, Danica, and I'd like to just introduce my fellow panelists. State Senator Sarah Mcbride.
Thank you so much, Andrea. It is great to be on with you, Danica, and Stephanie for a really historic conversation between all of us as out trans elected officials, something that really wouldn't have been possible just a decade ago. My name's Sarah Mcbride. I'm the state senator for Delaware's 1st State Senate District, which includes parts of our biggest city, Wilmington, and Bellefonte and Claymont, which is actually the community that President Biden spent his teenage years in and went to high school in. I first got involved in politics and government and advocacy as a young person. And in many ways, my journey to advocacy and politics ties into my own journey toward authenticity, to coming out. Because as a young trans person growing up, figuring out who I am and trying to figure out how I fit into this world, wondering whether our democracy was big enough to include someone like me, I got involved in politics because I saw that politics was the place where every avenue of society converges and where you can make the most amount of change for the most number of people in the most number of ways possible. And I think for me, I got involved because I thought perhaps even if I never come out, perhaps I can spend my life trying to build a world where more people can live openly, authentically, fully, and freely in our society, including more trans people. And I actually had the opportunity of getting involved early and calling the president's late son, Beau, my first boss in politics. He was an incredible man, a compassionate person, a dear friend, and an amazing ally to the trans community. I also come to this work, not just as someone who is trans, but also as someone who's loved someone who's trans. I met my future husband, Andrew, who was a transgender man fighting for equality, and we fell in love. After he was diagnosed with cancer and after serving as his caregiver and eventually losing Andy just days after we married, I decided to run for office because I saw in that experience, one, how lucky we were to have time together, how lucky he was to be able to get the care that he needed, how lucky I was to be able to take time off work and not have to sacrifice my income to be by his side. And I saw how urgent these issues are. I saw that every single time we ask people to sit back and allow for a slow conversation to take place before we treat them with dignity and ensure them opportunity, we are asking people to watch their one life pass by without the respect and fairness that everyone deserves, and that's too much to ask of anyone. And ultimately, I threw my hat in the ring for state senate here in Delaware because I'm hopeful. After 10 years as an advocate at first the state and then eventually national level with the Human Rights Campaign, I saw that it's always in our biggest challenges that we take our most significant steps forward. And that the story of our movement, the story that we celebrate in Pride Month and rededicate ourselves to in Pride Month, is the story of LGBTQ people transforming change that once seemed so impossible that it was almost incomprehensible, first into possibility and then into reality. And I felt like if we did that on so many issues, that we could continue to do it for our community and that we could do it on all of the issues that matter to LGBTQ people, from non-discrimination protections to economic opportunity, to healthcare, to education, to transportation, to criminal justice reform. And so I am now serving in my first term filled with hope and optimism that we have as a community, both the individual and collective capacity to bring about seemingly impossible change. And that has been informed in large part by my experiences working for, knowing, and calling the Biden family friends and allies. And I am just so excited that we are joining on this panel under the administration of Joe Biden, who I have seen throughout my life his deep commitment to trans rights. One of the first national politicians to embrace and champion trans rights. I've seen the tears in his eyes when we talk about violence against trans women of color. I've seen and heard the passion in his voice when he talks about passing the Equality Act. And I've seen his big heart when I came out to him and Beau and Dr. Biden and the whole Biden family. And so I am just so thrilled that we have the opportunity to serve alongside a president who truly sees us, cares for us, and is fighting alongside us. And speaking of someone who fights every single day for our community, I have the privilege of turning things over to Stephanie Byers, who's a member of the Kansas State House of Representatives representing the 86th district. Stephanie is both the first out trans legislator in Kansas and also the first Native American trans person elected to public office in our country. So I'll turn things over to my friend, Stephanie Byers.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm 58 years old, and I'm gonna throw that out there at the beginning because the fact that means in my life I was a child in the 60s, an adolescent in the 70s, became an adult in the 80s. And when we think about what has happened to our country during those decades, how we've become more and more accepting of people that may have been thought of as different earlier on as we progress forward. And here I am in Kansas serving as the first open trans legislator in the state of Kansas. For 32 years, I was a public school teacher. I taught band and orchestra, and that was my life. But I also taught most of that at Wichita North High School, which is a Title I inner city urban school that serves a very diverse population, predominantly Hispanic. And so I've been there in the fights when we talk about the access to education for dreamers. That has been a part of my advocacy to begin with. I advocated to keep the fine arts as a part of public schools because it's integral to what goes on. And in 2014, when I began to live my life authentically for who I really am, it was an easy step forward then to make that advocacy just shift over into supporting the LGBTQ community in all the ways. And of course, we see what happened almost immediately. We encountered at the state level bills banning trans people from bathrooms. An experience that I actually had when I was younger as a Native American, walking into a gas station in one of our Western states, and my father asking for the key to the restroom, and the station owner looking at us and saying, "Are you all Injun? Well, you might be nice people. I just don't let Injuns use my bathroom." And so that hit really near and dear to my heart very quickly and became a part of what I began to speak out. In 2018, I was named the GLSEN National Educator of the Year, which gave me a little bit bigger voice and more of a platform to be able to address these issues. In 2019, I retired from teaching, and shortly after was asked by GLSEN to represent them in a rally in October out in front of the U.S. Supreme Court on the same day they heard oral arguments on Bostock versus Clayton County. And so that voice added to the group of people that were there, talking about how if we can make on the basis of sex include gender identity and sexual orientation, how that would change so much for the people of the LGBTQ community across the United States, especially for those people who are transgender. At that point in time, I made my decision that I would run for the seat that we had open here in District 86 for the Kansas State Legislature. And of course, in 2020, was elected and was able to join the two other out openly LGBTQ members of our legislature. This year has seen an unprecedented number of bills attacking trans community, especially trans youth. And here in Kansas, we're no exception, especially when we look at a supermajority that pushed those bills to begin with. Having a person who is transgender stand in that house and directly address the other members of that house about what it means, how it feels to have those things launched at you, that it's not just a matter of statistics, it is actually a matter of individuals and people, makes a tremendous difference. The outpouring of emails and cards that came from the trans youth across Kansas, knowing that they have an advocate who looks like them, who understands their experience to some level, and who speaks for them, gives them hope. It makes a tremendous difference for everyone to know that if there's somebody that's there, as was said, if you can see it, you can be it. And I'm proud to be able to be that person that's standing there holding the door open for the next trans person that wants to run for office in Kansas, and to keep that open communication going so that we can keep this representation where it needs to be. I'm glad to be a part of this panel and appreciate all the opportunity we've given to this. And it's my turn now to turn back to our host and to talk about Danica. You have inspired, Danica, so many of us that are here today because you're the first one to break these barriers. What inspired you to run for public office, and what advice do you have for other transgender Americans who may be interested in becoming leaders in their community?
Oh, thank you so much, Representative Byers. And again, thank you to Senator McBride, and thank you to Councilwoman Jenkins so much for joining me, and just to everyone out there who's joining this conversation. What inspired me to run was, just my mom's commute. It was the fact that it was so bad when in the mid 90s when I was in 6th grade, and I'd be sitting at school until 6:30, 7 o'clock at night, waiting for her to come pick me up because she was battling it out on Route 28 for 2 hours. And, at the same time, when I had to make the decision to run, I knew it was, what my platform would be. It was a pretty easy decision because my predecessor was more concerned about where I went to the bathroom than how his constituents got to work. And so I decided to go do something about it. And I had to remember also that just because there weren't a lot of people like me in office didn't mean that we didn't have a lot of allies, didn't mean that we didn't have a lot of champions. And I remember in 2013, when then Delaware Attorney General Beau Biden was working with then advocate Sarah McBride to get the Delaware legislature to actually pass a trans rights bill, and how important that was. And so then 2 years later, after he died, and he had successfully spearheaded that legislation and got signed into law, I drove out to Dover to pay my respects to Beau. And when I got there, and I saw his flag draped casket, and I went to just, offer my grievances to, my grievance to then Vice President Biden. Vice President Biden, when I told him I just wanted to thank him for raising the son with the character of Beau, because when he was fighting for trans rights in Delaware, he was fighting for trans rights for all of us. Vice President Biden, his eyes were about quarter mast. He was clearly tired. He takes his hands, he puts them on my shoulders. He looks me in the eye and he goes, "We mean that. We mean that." He then brought me in for a hug, kissed the back of my right hand. And within the next 2 years, we would have a vice president of the United States who was notorious for attacking LGBTQ people. How different things became at that point. But under a Vice President Mike Pence, it became a very easy decision to run for office with that. It became a very easy decision to want to inspire people, to want to tell them that they can succeed because of who they are, not despite it. And their civil rights are worth protecting because of who they are. And so now in the Virginia General Assembly, I've been grateful to be able to pass 23 bills into law. And at the same time, 3 of those bills have been pro-LGBTQ equality bills, right alongside my 8 bills to feed hungry kids, right along my work, for transparency, for transportation reform and everything else. To be able to do that, to be able to send that message, a positive message in Virginia when we were seeing so many hostile bills in other states across the country, I want trans young people to be able to look at what we're doing and say, hey, you know what? We're welcome here. It's okay for us to be here. And in 2017, just to close on a good note, in 2017, when I launched my campaign, about a week into that campaign, a mother in Roanoke, about 4 hours away, showed an interview to her daughter, who was a little trans girl who was in 5th grade, who had tried to jump out of a 2nd floor window when she didn't think anyone could ever understand someone like her. She said she remembered that there was hope in that article, and that's why she gave it to her daughter to read. And she read it through 3 times, and she looked up and she goes, "She's just like me." And her mom goes, "She's just like you." And she goes, "Well, how does she do it? How does Danica put herself out there?" And her mom says, "Because she knows who she is, that she's confident who she is." And Clara said, "Well, if Danica can do it, so can I." She spent the rest of the campaign, drove 4 hours, with her mom all the way up to Northern Virginia, and we campaigned together. We did, ads together and everything. And then on election night 2017, when Andrea, myself, and 6 other trans people across the country were running elections, when I got to Waters and Brewery in Lake Ridge that night for the big party, after I had found out in Gainesville that I won, the first person I saw when I got outside my car was Clara. And so I picked her up. I looked her dead in the eye, just like Vice President Biden had done to me in 2016. Or 2015, and I told her, "Honey, you can be president. You can be whoever you want to be, whatever you want to be, because we just won." And that's the message I want to send to trans people across the country today, is that you can be yourself. You can find safe places to be yourself, whether it's in Virginia, Delaware, Minnesota, or even Kansas. There is someone here who cares about you. There's someone here who can relate to your story, and know that not only are you never alone with this, but your story has the ability to change your community, to change your state, and to change your country. And when you change a country, you change the world. So thank you all so much to my colleagues for joining us today. Thank you to everyone who's tuned in. Thank you to the Biden administration for giving us the space to be able to have this conversation. And please take care of yourselves and each other. Happy Pride Month, everyone.
Hi, my name is Schaefer Zaret. I use the pronouns she, her, hers, and I'm a trans activist, organizer, and an advocate for transgender youth, and an ambassador of Ariana Center, Trans Latina Florida. I'm joined here today by 7 other dynamic organizers from across the country, transgender young women of color, and gender non-binary young people of color, who are leading the change in their communities. This conversation is specifically about intersectionality. It is about centering the leadership of trans girls of color, young women of color, and gender nonconforming youth, and recognizing their unique lived experience at the intersection of their race, ethnicity, gender, gender identity, sexual orientation, and other identities, and recognizing the unique barriers they face to equity and opportunity. So let's jump in. As I stated earlier, I'm joined by incredible youth leaders and organizers who are driving change in their communities. Leaders that identify as transgender girls and young women and/or gender non-binary youth of color. These are leaders that advocate for policy at the intersection of race, gender, gender identity, and sexual orientation. There really is so much value in lived experience that drives this change, and there's so much value in centering leaders at the intersection of all of their multiple identities. So let's hear from them. First, we'll start with some introductions. We want to hear more from these young leaders. And we'll start with Jamie, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Jamison Ford, but I go by Jamie. I use any pronouns. I'm from Southeast DC, and I'm an organizer here with DC Girls Coalition, United Leaders for Freedom, Black Swan, and Black Millennials for Flint.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And next, let's hear from Gia.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gia. I use she, her pronouns, and I would say that I'm an LGBTQ advocate, and I identify as a trans woman.
Thank you. And next, let's hear from India.
My name is India. I'm 16 years old. I'm from South Carolina. I'm with a national agenda for Black girls, and I'm also part of Every Black Girl. And I'm non-binary.
Thank you. And Rebecca.
Hello, my name is Rebecca York. I use she and they pronouns, and I am from Maryland. I am a workplace educator with Out and Equal Workplace Advocates.
Wonderful, thank you. And Adeline?
Hi, my name is Adeline Mihil. I use she, her pronouns, and I am from South Texas.
Thank you. And finally, Logan.
Good morning. My name is Logan. My pronouns are they, them. I am an organizer, co-director, and co-conspirator based in Miami, Florida.
Great. Repping Miami, just like me. Thank you so much. And now we're going to get into some really great questions for our young people. First, we'll start with Jamie. Jamie, you've been involved in social justice work since the 2nd grade. Wow. What inspired your advocacy?
As I said, I'm Jamie. And I think there were a lot of factors that went into me wanting to get into social justice work. But I think the biggest part was the community that I lived in. I was really fortunate to grow up and be around and meet so many strong and inspiring people of color here in DC. And many of them are already involved in social justice, like Latricia Adams and Samantha Davis. So just being able to see them speak and hold so much power and take up space is really what inspired me to do the same.
I love that. Thank you so much for channeling that into your work. I love to see that. And next, we'll go to Gia. Gia, what is one of the biggest barriers you'd say that transgender girls and young women of color face in their schools and communities?
Yeah, first off, I just want to say I'm from Connecticut. I forgot to mention that earlier. But I would say one of the biggest barriers is support. And I think that the reason that is because there isn't enough education out there for people of color and for LGBTQ people in general, especially for trans people of color like myself. And I would say that when I was younger, personally, I didn't see much education on this topic or anything. And as I got older and I discovered the internet, I discovered so many negative things. And there's still a lot of negative things out there, but I wouldn't say that when I did come out as transgender, that was my experience in any way. I had a very positive experience. And for me, it's really important to be able to educate young kids in a positive way on what it means to be transgender or a person of color, because that is super important. And I actually wrote a book, a kid's book about being transgender, and I'm super excited. It just came out, and I'm really hoping that it educates young kids in the classroom, because the biggest barrier is educating those people at a young age so they have a positive association with a trans person or a person of color. And that's so important for changing the narrative in today's society.
Such amazing accomplishments, and congratulations on the book. That's really amazing. Representation matters, and you're living that every day. Thank you so much. Next, we'll go to India. So India, in South Carolina, you spend time organizing for a national agenda for Black girls. Why is having policy that supports Black girls, trans Black girls, and gender nonconforming youth of color so important?
Okay. Hi, my name is India. And I said, we are at the crossroads of racism, sexism, and transphobia. We need policies written and passed to protect passed with our input, to protect us and to protect our rights and to protect our joy. Black girls, Black trans girls, and gender nonconforming youth of color are always forgotten or intentionally left out of the conversation. And we have the power to change that. I want to live a life that is free, and I deserve to.
Yes, you do, and you choose organizing to do that. Why do you choose organizing? What does it mean to you? How do you channel that passion into your work?
Well, I challenged it into my work by saying, I am 16 years old and I've been organizing for 5 years. Organizing is a part of my identity. Working with other young people like me is empowering, and I believe that people need to hear our stories. When we share our stories collectively, we make a bigger impact. My organizing experience with Every Black Girl and a national agenda for Black girls has allowed me to expand my work nationally as I build community with others, Black girls, and gender nonconforming youth of color, to create a world that accepts us, uplifts us in our entirety, truly is reflective of us and our whole selves.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And I'm so glad you made that choice to start organizing, representing your community, and raising that visibility for all of us throughout the community. Thank you so much. Next, we'll go to Rebecca. So Rebecca, this year we have seen countless tough moments of racial reckoning in our country. We've seen heightened violence in the AAPI community, including violence at the intersection of racism, sexism, and gender-based violence. What does it mean for you to lead as a non-binary young person?
My identities as a queer, non-binary Asian American are central to how I experience the world. They inform my work as an LGBTQ trainer as well. Something you might not know just from looking at me, though, is that I'm also a transracial, transnational adoptee with white parents. And that's also essential to my lived experience. I clearly belonged to my white family, but growing up, outsiders, the people who didn't know me, didn't agree. Their message was, you're not who you think you are. But what did they know? I've always lived in this place in between worlds, as an Asian adoptee and as a non-binary person. Of course, there were really painful moments of exclusion, but they gave me the ability to see people beyond just what meets the eye. If I don't live in just one world, then chances are other people don't either. In my role as a workplace educator at Out and Equal, I try to lead people into hearing one another and viewing each other not as labels or categories, but really as people. People with talent, people with diverse lived experiences, people with the drive to be compassionate to one another. For too long, we've pretended that people like me don't exist. Forums like this, where we're elevating these identities, make me hopeful for what's ahead.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that, Rebecca. Myself, as an adoptee as well with white parents, as a Latinx trans person, I can relate to balancing both worlds, that friction and tension. And you mentioned it briefly, but how does your identity also impact how you advocate for your communities as you see it now?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I am an educator, a trainer on issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion as they pertain to LGBTQ identities for workplaces. And prior to that, I was doing work around LGBTQ youth inclusion, again, working with young people and parents and educators. And really, as that adoptee, as this person who's in an in-between space of identity that is often overlooked, I find that I am more often equipped to bridge that gap, to be that communicator, bringing those two often disparate or kind of at odds opinions together into the same room.
Well, it's a beautiful, delicate balance, and we're happy to see it and so grateful for your work. Thank you so much. And now we'll move to Adeline. So how can schools do a better job at making transgender girls of color feel safe and included in their school environment?
Well, I've been in both environments, one very positive, and then whenever the administration switched, it was very negative, and it was because they didn't keep my privacy private. They were informing all the parents and they were telling them all this stuff, and that put me in a very uncomfortable situation.
Thank you so much for sharing that really personal experience. So if I were to ask you and you were to just sum it up, what do trans girls need in school? What do you need in school?
We need the administration to be educated on the topic, and we need something to protect us because it's getting out of control.
Yes, definitely. And as we look to create safe spaces, sometimes we have the intention to make things safe, but as you mentioned about sharing private information about your transition, it ended up doing more harm and not making you feel safe in school.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that with us, Adeline.
You're welcome.
And finally, we'll go to Logan. Logan, what does it mean to be an ally for transgender and gender nonconforming young people of color?
To be an ally for trans and gender nonconforming youth, especially those of color, means actually showing up in ways that matter, right? So changing your logo to the pride flag colors and other like showy displays of solidarity while trans and gender nonconforming youth are consistently under attack and experiencing violence is ultimately meaningless. So to be an ally means to uplift our voices and honor our labor. To be an ally means to stop murdering Black trans women so that their life expectancy can surpass 35 years of age. To be an ally means to stop tokenizing us to show how much of an ally you are. We've been demanding for the quality of life that we're owed, and y'all have just continued to fail us. So if you want to be an ally, now is the time to actually start listening to us.
Right. Listen and think before acting. Just be supportive, but also, like you said, uplift those voices. Thank you so much for that perspective. It's really important, especially as a resident with you in Miami, Florida. We're seeing it front and center right now. Well, thank you all. Our communities, I know, are better and stronger because of our collective leadership, because we have a seat at the table to impact policy and lead improvements. I've really been inspired by all of your answers, by your work, by your passion and your advocacy. And I'm excited to continue to see federal policy that unapologetically lifts up, centers, and protects trans girls of color, trans women of color, and gender non-binary youth of color. I've been your moderator for the day, Schaefer Zaret. From myself, Adiana Center Trans Latina Florida, our panelists, and all of those on today, thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to seeing you out in the community.
My name is Kristen Clark, Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Rights Division at the U.S. Department of Justice. Across the country, we are witnessing disturbing attacks on the rights and freedoms of transgender people. Members of the transgender community, especially transgender women of color, face harrowing rates of harassment and violence at school, in their neighborhoods, in the workplace, and at the doctor's office. Transgender people face laws and policies that penalize them just for being who they are. History shows that those with power and privilege must fight with and for those still seeking to enjoy this nation's promise of equal justice under law. The Civil Rights Division is here to continue that fight. Just last week, we filed statements of interest in 2 federal court cases, one in West Virginia and the other in Arkansas, to explain how federal civil rights laws protect the rights of transgender youth targeted by discriminatory state actions. Right now in West Virginia, BPJ, an 11-year-old girl, is fighting for a chance to participate on her middle school's sports teams. She's from a family of runners and, like so many other kids, wants to follow in their footsteps. She wants to join the girls' track and cross-country teams. She wants the experience of being on a team with her classmates and friends. But BPJ is transgender, and because of that, she may not get that chance. West Virginia has passed a law that bans outright middle school girls who are transgender, like BPJ, from participating on girls' sports teams. This law and others like it target and single out transgender youth, denying opportunities for growth and development that should be open to all students. For that reason, last week, we at the Justice Department and the U.S. Department of Education filed a statement of interest in BPJ's lawsuit explaining how West Virginia's laws violate both the Constitution and Title IX. In Arkansas, the state legislature recently passed a law that will prevent transgender youth from receiving medically necessary health care to affirm their gender identity. For transgender youth, that medical care can be life-saving. By banning gender-affirming care and punishing providers for even making referrals, the Arkansas law stands between transgender youth and their doctors. It substitutes the judgment of lawmakers for that of medical professionals. It jeopardizes the physical and mental health of vulnerable young people. And as we wrote in our statement of interest last week, it violates the Constitution. We cannot and will not stand by as states deny crucial health care to transgender youth for reasons that are rooted in bias and prejudice. The Civil Rights Division is also acting to address the scourge of violence targeting transgender people, especially Black transgender women and other transgender women of color. No one should have to live in fear because of who they are. In March, the Attorney General called for an expedited review of how the Justice Department can improve enforcement of laws that prohibit hate crimes and hate incidents, including those based on actual or perceived gender identity. Based on that review, we're working now to improve incident reporting. We're ramping up law enforcement training and coordination at all levels of government, and we're prioritizing community outreach. We also know that transgender people face alarmingly high rates of sexual violence and abuse. And in our county's prisons and jails, those risks are even greater. Transgender people are 9 times more likely to be sexually assaulted by other inmates than the rest of the U.S. population. And that's why we weighed in on a case involving Ashley Diamond, a woman who is transgender but is serving time in a Georgia men's prison. In April, we filed a statement of interest in Ms. Diamond's case alleging repeated sexual assaults by other prisoners. Our brief explained that the 8th Amendment of the Constitution requires prisons to provide reasonable protection to all prisoners, including transgender prisoners, from serious harm, including sexual abuse. Whether in prisons, in schools, at work, or just walking down the street, transgender people face discrimination at nearly every turn. The Civil Rights Division will continue to use every tool at our disposal to stand up for transgender people and to fight the unlawful discrimination they face. And we'll continue to lead and support other federal agencies in their efforts to do the same. On his first day in office, the President signed Executive Order 13988, preventing and combating discrimination on the basis of gender identity or sexual orientation. The order directed agencies to work with the Justice Department to consider whether the reasoning of the Supreme Court's landmark decision in Bostock, a Title VII employment case, applies to other statutes that prohibit sex discrimination. We began working to implement this executive order on the very day it was issued. Since then, we sent a memo to all agency civil rights and general counsel offices explaining that Title IX prohibits discrimination on the basis of gender identity and sexual orientation. And we've worked with agencies across the federal government to help them implement the executive order's requirements. Those agencies are full and essential partners in this important work. To the transgender community, especially transgender youth, we want you to know that we're working every day to meet the executive order's goal, that every person, quote, be treated with respect and dignity and able to live without fear, no matter who they are or whom they love. If you or someone you know is facing discrimination because you are transgender, we want to know. You can file a complaint now at civilrights.justice.gov. We see you, we hear you, and we will keep fighting for your inclusion, your dignity, and your equal rights under law.
Thank you for joining the White House virtual convening on transgender equality. Thank you to the amazing leaders who joined us from across the country and to the young people who demonstrated extraordinary courage in sharing these personal stories.